Hi folks, Florida Man here. I've been interested in making a Stalemate Lines video for a while, but I wasn't feeling any particular urgency to do so, until one of my patrons made the request. For that reason, I bumped the video idea to the front of the line. So please enjoy it, and if you are interested in this subject, you can thank David Walden for requesting it. What are Stalemate Lines? They're basically choke points that exist in the standard diplomacy map as it's designed. These choke points make it impossible to advance beyond a certain point in a certain region, no matter how many units you have on your side, because if the enemy has a certain minimum force available to defend that area, you will not be able to put enough units on the front with them to be able to push their front line back. The Stalemate Lines occur across a sort of dead zone in the middle of the map. There's a string of spaces that all border each other, along with Switzerland in the middle, that are not centers and are only valuable because if you get to them at the right time, you could either help yourself get closer to a solo, or be involved in stopping a solo. These non-center spaces form a continuous line separating the northwest from the southeast, ending in St. Pete, a Russian center in the northeast. What you are looking at now is roughly what's sometimes considered the main Stalemate line, because it separates the board into two halves, each of which has 17 centers on it. If your coalition can gain control of certain spaces on one side or the other, you can hold out against a solo attempt forever, if the will to do so exists. If you're the one under attack and you're on the western side, you need to control Mid-Atlantic Ocean, Portugal, Spain, Marseille, Gascony, Burgundy, Munich, Berlin, St. Pete, and several other spaces to secure this particular line. The reason why I don't specify the last few spaces you need is because you could get two of the three of Ruhr, Kiel, and Baltic Sea, and if you have the other spaces I've described, you'll be able to defend Berlin and Munich forever. You also need to have a unit next to St. Pete to support that unit holding in place, but there are a few options there. Also, if you have all of Ruhr, Kiel, and Baltic Sea, you no longer need to control Gascony, because Burgundy can support Marseille in place rather than supporting Munich. If you're the one under attack and you're on the eastern side, the Stalemate Line for you looks a bit different. You need to have units in Warsaw, Moscow, Sevastopol, Ukraine, Galicia, Silesia, Bohemia, Tyrolia, and certain spaces in the Mediterranean region. If you control North Africa, Western Mediterranean, Gulf of Lion, and Piedmont, you can prevent any enemy advance through the Mediterranean if those units are all fleets. If one is an army, you may need an additional unit, a fleet in Tyrrhenian Sea. If you don't control North Africa and Western Mediterranean and Gulf of Lion, you need to have fleets in Tunis, Tyrrhenian Sea, Ionian Sea, and either Rome or Naples or Tuscany, along with an army in Piedmont and an army in Venice or Tuscany to support it. Either way, regardless of who's attacking, the spaces they need to take to attempt to cross the Stalemate Line don't change very much. They're these spaces I've outlined. Getting into a position that even approximates the Stalemate Line positions, without being exactly right, is frequently enough to result in a draw. This game that is not quite in the final Stalemate Line position ended in a 4-power draw. This game likewise ended in a 4-power draw, with the notable difference being that St. Pete had not been conquered by the Western powers. At the same time, getting a unit or two across the Stalemate Line in the endgame is often enough to win. In this game, France got into Bohemia, Warsaw, and Galicia. That was where the game ended in a French solo. The French didn't actually need Galicia to win either. Just getting into Bohemia was over the Stalemate Line, and it would have been enough, with correct guesses, to give France the ability to finish in Warsaw. If a game devolves into just butting heads on this line for any period of time, with no movement backward and forward possible, the players should just agree to a draw. Because the only way the wall will be breached is if someone betrays their ally or allies, which is usually against their interests or at least involves risking total defeat in order to potentially advance their position a little or chisel another player out of the draw. There are other Stalemate Lines that represent variations on the common theme that you've noticed in these maps. In this map, because the Germans control North Atlantic Ocean, Irish Sea, English Channel, Brest, Gascony, Burgundy, and Marseille, the German position is basically unbreakable on the Western Front. In the east, things are less settled, but the point is, even without holding the Mid-Atlantic Ocean, if you have certain sea spaces around it, you can keep someone from advancing from one side of the map to the other. Similarly, from the southern side, if you control Portugal, Spain, Gulf of Lion, Western Mediterranean, and North Africa, it doesn't matter if the enemy has Mid-Atlantic Ocean, Gascony, and Marseille. No matter how many units they have, they won't be able to advance further through those spaces. There are a number of other Stalemate Line options, but not all of them are really reliable in terms of stopping a solo. Some of them involve guessing games, and some of them will stop an enemy from advancing, but not all of them make solo impossible, because certain stalemate line positions do not have 17 centers on one side of their line. Only the main stalemate line, and positions very close to that, can protect perfectly against a solo. This is also why the centers along the stalemate line are frequently considered very important and valuable. In particular, centers like Munich and Tunis are well known to be extremely important and valuable. Tunis is a part of the eastern side of the stalemate line, but it frequently gets captured by France, and when that happens, the rest of the board is suddenly put on notice that France is now a solo threat. The reason is because you can't stop France from soloing with a stalemate line at that point, unless you take Tunis back first, because France doesn't need any other centers over the stalemate line once they've taken Tunis. If France controls all of England and Tunis, they're more than halfway to the solo. They just need to conquer the German centers, Scandinavia, and St. Pete. St. Pete, despite being a Russian center initially, is on the northwest side of the stalemate line, so it will naturally fall to a Western power who has conquered all of Scandinavia. Similarly, although Turkey doesn't look too massive in this map, this game was a Turkish solo. It ended right here. Turkey got exactly one center on the western side of the stalemate line, Munich. The game ended at that point. The other centers that are along the stalemate line, like the Iberian centers, Marseille, all of Italy, Berlin, Moscow, Warsaw, and St. Pete, are similarly valuable real estate, although acquiring them when you're on the other side of the line is usually more difficult than acquiring Tunis or Munich. That's the power of the stalemate line. If someone is getting too large on one side of the map, and no one gets control over the stalemate line, that large power will probably win the game. Fortunately, in games with more experienced players, people will usually recognize if a large power is trying to cross the stalemate line, and they will very frequently quickly join forces to stop that from happening. An interesting and potentially dangerous thing to keep in mind is that many players who have an eye toward that likelihood will try to cross the stalemate line early on. Efforts to do that can range from the clever effort of France to capture Tunis early on, to the English effort in the Western Triple to get through St. Pete in order to capture Moscow and Warsaw, to the Russian effort to make sure they keep control of St. Pete, to the frequently almost suicidal Italian push to grab Munich early on. If you can do that, you can hopefully acquire and keep a base across the stalemate line without arousing too much suspicion and use that foothold to make your solo bid later. In practice, it's usually pretty difficult to do this while also expanding elsewhere, which is obviously also necessary to solo. After all, in order to have a really secure hold on Munich, Italy needs to either surround it with Italian armies, or use great negotiating skills to keep that center safe until they're ready to reinforce it with those armies. Similarly, if France wants to hold on to Tunis, there needs to be at least 1 or 2 French units in the Mediterranean at all times, holding onto that territory and making it difficult for anyone else to advance toward it. That makes it more difficult to advance elsewhere. These are complex problems, but those are the sorts of problems we face when we strive for the solo and plan ahead to secure the victory. I hope you enjoyed this overview of stalemate lines. If so, I recommend you like and subscribe for similar content, and comment below with any insights you have about getting around these difficult natural barriers on the diplomacy map. Also, please join me in thanking the people whose names now appear on the screen. They are the patrons and subtitle writers for this channel, so they're helping as we try to take Florida Man diplomacy to the next level and conquer the world of diplomacy social media. And for more exclusive Florida Man diplomacy stuff, check out my Patreon or my blog. Until next time, Florida Man out.